The worst betrayals don't announce themselves with dramatic music or ominous warnings. They slip into your life wearing familiar faces, speaking in voices you trust, holding hands you've held 1,000 times before. Ethan Rivera learned this truth on what should have been one of the happiest nights of his life, in a moment that would shatter everything he thought he knew about love, friendship, and his own worth. The crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across the marble floors of the Grandview estate, transforming the ballroom into something out of a fairy tale. Ethan stood near the French doors leading to the terrace, champagne flute in hand, watching guests celebrate his engagement to Marcus Moretti. Everything looked perfect from the outside: the imported roses, the string quartet playing Vivaldi, the designer tuxedos, the carefully curated guest list of society's elite. Yet something felt hollow, like biting into beautiful fruit only to find it tasteless. Marcus had been distant all evening, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. When Ethan tried to hold his hand during their first dance, Marcus pulled away slightly, muttering something about maintaining composure in front of his father's business associates. Ethan told himself it was just nerves, that Marcus was always more reserved in public. But the champagne tasted bitter on his tongue, and the congratulations from strangers felt like hollow echoes in a vast, empty space. Dylan Chen, Ethan's best friend since their sophomore year at art school, had been equally strange. They'd been inseparable for 4 years, late-night coffee runs, critiquing each other's work, navigating heartbreaks and triumphs together. Dylan knew Ethan's coffee order, his mother's birthday, the exact tone of voice he used when he was pretending to be fine but wasn't. Yet tonight, Dylan wouldn't meet his eyes. Every time Ethan approached, Dylan found an excuse to slip away into the crowd, leaving Ethan with an uncomfortable knot in his stomach. "You look troubled, darling." Teresa, Ethan's older sister, appeared at his elbow. She'd flown in from Seattle for the engagement party, bringing her characteristic bluntness and a stunning emerald dress. "Having second thoughts?" "No, of course not," Ethan lied, forcing brightness into his voice. "Just overwhelmed. This is all so much bigger than I expected." Teresa studied him with the penetrating gaze only an older sister could master. "Marcus's world is bigger than anything we grew up with. Are you sure you're ready for it? These people." She gestured subtly at the crowd of impeccably dressed guests, "They operate on a different frequency than us regular folks." Ethan wanted to defend his choice, to insist that Marcus loved him despite the obvious class differences, that their connection transcended money and status. But the words stuck in his throat. How long had it been since Marcus looked at him with genuine warmth? When was the last time they'd laughed together, really laughed, without Marcus checking his phone or cutting the moment short with some pressing obligation? "I need more champagne," Ethan announced, setting down his empty glass. "Want anything?" Teresa shook her head, concern creasing her forehead. "Don't stay at this party on my account if you're not happy. We can leave right now. I'll fake a medical emergency if you want." The offer was tempting, but Ethan pushed it away. He was being paranoid, letting his old insecurities about not being good enough for Marcus's world poison what should be a joyful evening. He kissed Teresa's cheek and headed toward the bar, weaving through clusters of guests discussing stock portfolios and European vacations. The main bar was crowded, so Ethan remembered the smaller service bar near the back corridor that led to the private rooms. The hallway was blessedly quiet, muffling the party's noise to a distant hum. He could hear his own footsteps on the hardwood, the rustle of his jacket, his own breathing gradually slowing as the tension in his shoulders began to ease. That's when he heard the other sounds. Low voices coming from the alcove ahead, speaking in urgent whispers. Then a soft laugh he'd know anywhere, Marcus's laugh, but lighter and more genuine than Ethan had heard in months. His feet carried him forward before his brain could signal caution. The alcove was a semi-private space with velvet curtains partially drawn, meant for guests who needed a moment away from the party. Through the gap in the curtains, Ethan saw them. Marcus and Dylan, bodies pressed together, Marcus's hand tangled in Dylan's hair, kissing with the kind of desperate passion that speaks of forbidden longing finally unleashed. Time fractured. Ethan stood frozen, his mind refusing to process what his eyes clearly saw. This had to be a misunderstanding, a trick of the light, anything but what it appeared to be. But then Marcus pulled back slightly, cupping Dylan's face with both hands, and said words that Ethan would hear in his nightmares for weeks to come. "We have to be more careful. Just a few more months of this charade with Ethan, and Father will be satisfied. Then we can be together properly." Dylan's response was soft but audible. "I hate watching you pretend to love him. I hate that he gets to wear your ring when I'm the one you want." "You know you're the only one I've ever really wanted," Marcus murmured, leaning in for another kiss. He's safe. Stable. The kind of partner Father expects me to present. But he's not you. He could never be you." The champagne flute slipped from Ethan's fingers, shattering against the floor with a sound like breaking crystal bells. Both men in the alcove jerked apart, their faces transforming through a rapid sequence of emotions: surprise, guilt, defiance, and in Marcus's case, cold calculation. "Ethan," Marcus said, his voice steady despite being caught in flagranti. "This isn't what it looks like." The sheer audacity of the lie sparked something hot and furious in Ethan's chest, burning away the shock. "Really? Because it looks like my fiancé is kissing my best friend. It sounds like you've been lying to me for months. It feels like my entire life just revealed itself as a carefully constructed fraud." Dylan at least had the decency to look ashamed, his gaze dropping to the floor. But Marcus straightened his jacket, his face settling into the aristocratic mask Ethan had always interpreted as sophistication but now recognized as emotional armor. "If you'd let me explain," Marcus began. "Explain what?" Ethan's voice cracked, tears burning behind his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. "Not here. Not in front of them. Explain that I was never anything but a placeholder. That you got engaged to me because I was safe and stable and exactly the kind of boring, reliable partner Daddy wanted for you. Explain that my best friend has been sleeping with my fiancé behind my back, and you both thought I was too stupid or blind to notice." "It's not that simple," Dylan finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Marcus and I, we tried to stay apart. We really did. But some connections are just too strong to deny." The words were like acid on an open wound. Ethan looked at Dylan, this person he trusted with his deepest fears and greatest hopes, who'd held him when he cried after his mother's death, who'd been his designated emergency contact for 3 years. "How long? Does it matter?" Marcus asked coldly. "Yes," Ethan said through gritted teeth. "It matters to me." Dylan and Marcus exchanged a glance, and in that silent communication, Ethan saw the truth of their intimacy. They had their own language, their own understanding, built on stolen moments and secret glances, while Ethan remained oblivious. 6 months, Dylan admitted. Since the charity gala at the Metropolitan Museum. We were both in the sculpture garden, and it happened. 6 months. Half a year of lies and deception. Half a year of Ethan planning a future that was built on sand. He remembered that night, remembered Marcus saying he needed to network with potential clients, remembered coming home alone and texting Dylan about how lonely these high society events made him feel. Dylan had responded with sympathetic emojis and reassurances. All while he and Marcus had been together. "Why even propose if you didn't want to marry me?" Ethan asked Marcus, hating how small his voice sounded. For the first time, something flickered in Marcus's eyes, maybe regret, maybe just annoyance at being caught. "My father has been pressuring me to settle down. You know how traditional he is about family and legacy. You were perfect on paper, creative but not too controversial, attractive but not threatening, ambitious enough to seem interesting but not so successful you'd overshadow me. And you were so clearly in love with me, so eager to fit into my world. It seemed mutually beneficial. Mutually beneficial. As if their relationship had been a business transaction. As if the past 2 years of Ethan's life, the moments he treasured and replayed in his mind, had been nothing but items on a contract. You're despicable, Ethan said quietly, pulling the engagement ring off his finger. The 3-carat diamond caught the light one last time before Ethan threw it at Marcus's feet. You're a coward and a liar, and I hope you and Dylan are very happy together. You deserve each other. He turned to leave, desperate to escape before the tears won their battle against his will. But Marcus's voice stopped him. You'll regret making a scene about this. My family has considerable influence in this city. One word from my father, and your little graphic design business will find it very difficult to attract clients. Ethan looked back, seeing Marcus clearly for perhaps the first time, not the sophisticated, cultured man he'd fallen for, but a spoiled, entitled child wielding his father's power like a weapon. Is that a threat? Consider it friendly advice, Marcus said with a cold smile. Walk away quietly, and we can all move on with our lives. Make trouble, and you'll discover just how complicated life can become for people who cross the Moretti family. The mention of the Moretti family sent a chill down Ethan's spine. He'd always known Marcus came from money and influence, but there were rumors, whispers about the family's business dealings that went beyond their legitimate real estate and import companies. Marcus had laughed off those rumors as prejudice against Italian-American families, but now, watching the calculating gleam in his ex-fiancée's eyes, Ethan wondered what else had been a lie. I'm not afraid of you, Ethan said, though his voice trembled slightly. Then you're more foolish than I thought, Marcus replied. Go back to your little apartment, your little life, and forget this ever happened. That's my final piece of advice to you. Ethan left without another word, walking through the party on legs that felt disconnected from his body. He saw Teresa's alarmed expression as he passed, her movement toward him, but he kept walking. He needed out of this ballroom, this building, this glittering world that had never really wanted him anyway. The cool night air hit him like a slap when he pushed through the front doors. Valet stared as he stumbled down the steps, still wearing his tuxedo, tears now flowing freely down his face. He walked for blocks, not knowing or caring where he was going, just needing distance from the scene of his humiliation. Eventually, his aimless wandering brought him to St. Augustine's, a small Catholic church tucked between office buildings in the financial district. The door was unlocked, as Father Giuseppe always kept it for those seeking solace. Ethan had been volunteering there for the past year, helping with their community art program for at-risk youth. The space felt safe, sacred in a way that had nothing to do with religion and everything to do with authentic kindness. He slipped into a back pew, finally allowing himself to break down completely. The sobs came from somewhere deep and primal, the sound of a man grieving not just a relationship but his own naivete, his own willingness to ignore warning signs because he so desperately wanted to be loved. Are you all right, son? The voice was deep and gentle, with a trace of an Italian accent. Ethan looked up through tear-blurred vision to see an older man standing in the aisle. He was distinguished, probably in his mid-40s, with silver threading through dark hair, wearing an expensive suit that somehow didn't look ostentatious in the church's humble setting. His eyes held genuine concern, not the performative sympathy Ethan had endured all night from Marcus's friends. I'm sorry, Ethan wiped at his face, embarrassed. I should go. I didn't mean to disturb anyone. The church is meant for people in pain, the man said, sitting down in the pew ahead of Ethan and turning to face him. I'm Alessandro. And you look like a man whose world just fell apart. There was something in Alessandro's voice, a knowing quality that suggested he'd experienced his own share of devastation. Maybe it was the emotional exhaustion, or the need to tell someone who didn't know the players in his personal tragedy, but Ethan found himself talking. He told this stranger about the betrayal, about discovering his fiancé and best friend together, about the threats and the humiliation, though he didn't mention Marcus by name. Alessandro listened without interruption, his expression growing darker as the story unfolded. When Ethan finished, Alessandro was quiet for a long moment. I'm sorry you experienced such cruelty, Alessandro finally said. Betrayal by those we trust is the deepest wound. It makes us question our own judgment, wonder if we were fools for believing in love at all. Have you been betrayed like this? Ethan asked. A shadow crossed Alessandro's face. Not in the same way. But I lost my wife 5 years ago to cancer. The betrayal there was different, watching a body betray itself, watching medicine and prayer both fail. It taught me that life is both more precious and more brutal than we like to believe. He paused, studying Ethan with an intensity that should have felt uncomfortable but somehow didn't. May I ask your name? Ethan. Ethan Rivera. It's nice to meet you, Ethan Rivera, though I wish it were under better circumstances. Tell me, what will you do now? It was a simple question with no simple answer. Ethan's life had been so intertwined with Marcus's for the past 2 years, social circles, routines, future plans. Untangling himself would be like trying to separate threads in a tapestry without destroying the whole cloth. I don't know, Ethan admitted. Start over, I guess. That's what people do, right? They pick up the pieces and start over. The strongest steel is forged in the hottest fire, Alessandro said. This pain will transform you, if you let it. The question is whether you'll become bitter or become wiser. They talked for another hour, an easy conversation that felt like talking to an old friend despite having just met. Alessandro shared stories about his late wife Isabella, how she'd loved art and music, how her death had left him floating for years. Ethan talked about his design work, his dreams of opening his own gallery someday, his complicated relationship with his working-class roots and the wealthy world Marcus had pulled him into. Your ex-fiancé was a fool, Alessandro said as they finally prepared to leave. Any man who would treat someone like you as a mere accessory understands nothing about value. Real value, the kind that lasts. Thank you, Ethan said, meaning it. You didn't have to spend your evening listening to a stranger's problems. Perhaps I needed the reminder that I'm not the only one carrying wounds, Alessandro replied. Would you, I know this might seem forward, but would you be willing to meet for coffee sometime? I find I enjoy your company, and I could use a friend who understands what it means to start over. It should have seemed strange, accepting an offer of friendship from a man he'd just met in a church while crying over his broken engagement. But something in Alessandro's manner felt genuine, uncomplicated by the social games Ethan had grown tired of in Marcus's world. I'd like that, Ethan said, pulling out his phone to exchange numbers. As they stepped out into the night, Ethan felt something shift inside him. The pain was still there, raw and burning, but beneath it was something else, a tiny spark of possibility, the sense that maybe this ending was actually a beginning in disguise. He had no idea that the man he'd just befriended was Alessandro Moretti, Marcus's father and one of the most powerful men in the city's underworld. He didn't know that this chance meeting would upend both their lives in ways neither could predict. He didn't know that the worst night of his life had just set in motion events that would lead him to the truest love he'd ever known. All Ethan knew, walking away from St. Augustine's with Alessandro's number in his phone, was that for the first time in months, he didn't feel completely alone. The days following the engagement party dissolution moved with the strange, disjointed quality of a fever dream. Ethan moved through his routines mechanically, waking up, going to work at the small design studio where he freelanced, avoiding the dozens of messages flooding his phone. Marcus called 17 times the first day, each voicemail oscillating between apologetic and threatening. Dylan sent long text messages trying to explain, to justify, to somehow make the betrayal understandable. Ethan deleted them all without reading past the first few words. Teresa stayed for a week, sleeping on his couch and making sure he ate actual meals instead of surviving on coffee and spite. She wanted to fly back to Seattle with him, get him away from the city that now felt contaminated with memories, but Ethan refused. Running away felt like letting Marcus win, like admitting he didn't belong in the life he'd built here. The one bright spot in the wreckage was Alessandro. They met for coffee 3 days after the church encounter, at a small Italian cafe in Brooklyn that Alessandro said made the only decent espresso in the city. Alessandro was easy to talk to, with a dry sense of humor and a wealth of stories from his life and travels. He asked about Ethan's work with genuine interest, requesting to see his portfolio and offering thoughtful feedback on his designs. You have real talent, Alessandro said, studying a series of brand designs Ethan had created for a boutique hotel. These aren't just pretty pictures. There's intelligence behind them, strategic thinking. You understand how to tell a story through visual language. The compliment warmed something in Ethan's chest that had felt frozen since the betrayal. Marcus had always been dismissive of his work, calling it cute or nice in tones that suggested it was a pleasant hobby rather than a serious profession. They met again 5 days later, this time for a walk through Central Park. Alessandro pointed out his favorite spots, the Bethesda Fountain, where he proposed to Isabella, the Shakespeare Garden, where she'd read to him on summer afternoons, the quiet path near the reservoir where he came to think when business pressures became overwhelming. "What kind of business are you in?" Ethan asked as they sat on a bench overlooking the water. He'd been curious but hesitant to pry. Alessandro's expression became carefully neutral. "Import and export, primarily. Some real estate investments. Various family holdings that have been passed down through generations." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "It's complicated work. Not always clean, but it provides well for those who depend on me." There was something in the way he said it, a subtle warning beneath the vague description. Ethan found he didn't particularly care. Whatever Alessandro did for a living, the man himself had shown more genuine kindness in 2 weeks than Marcus had in 2 years. Their friendship deepened quickly, with the intensity that sometimes happens when two people meet at exactly the right, or wrong, moment in their lives. Alessandro introduced Ethan to his favorite restaurants, hole-in-the-wall places that tourists never found. They attended a classical music concert at Carnegie Hall, where Ethan discovered Alessandro's encyclopedic knowledge of opera. Ethan took Alessandro to a contemporary art exhibit in Chelsea, watching the older man's face light up with genuine appreciation for the bold, experimental pieces. Isabella would have loved this, Alessandro murmured, standing before a massive abstract canvas. She always said art should challenge, not just comfort. 3 weeks after the engagement party, the fragile piece Ethan had been building shattered. He arrived at his studio one morning to find 2 potential clients had cancelled long-standing contracts. By afternoon, a third called to postpone indefinitely. When Ethan pressed for reasons, he got vague excuses, but the timing was too suspicious to ignore. His phone rang that evening, a number he didn't recognize. Against his better judgment, he answered. "Ethan, it's Marcus." His ex's voice was cold, businesslike. "I thought I'd give you courtesy notice. You've been blacklisted from working with anyone in our social circle. Word has spread that you're unstable, vindictive, possibly embezzling from clients." Completely fabricated, of course, but perception is reality in our world. Rage, white-hot and righteous, flooded through Ethan. "You're destroying my career because I wouldn't quietly accept your betrayal." "I'm protecting my reputation," Marcus corrected. "You should have taken my advice and moved on quietly. Now you're learning there are consequences for defying the Moretti family. This is just the beginning, Ethan. Keep making trouble, and you'll find it becomes very difficult to work in this city at all." The line went dead. Ethan stood in his small apartment, hands shaking with fury and helplessness. Marcus was right, he had the power and connections to make Ethan's professional life miserable. The Moretti family's reach was extensive, their influence touching countless businesses and organizations throughout the city. He called Alessandro without thinking it through, needing to hear a friendly voice. "Are you busy? I could really use someone to talk to." "Come to my house," Alessandro said immediately, giving an address in Greenwich Village. "I'll have dinner ready." The brownstone was elegant but understated, with warm lighting and comfortable furniture that prioritized livability over showpiece perfection. Alessandro greeted him at the door, took one look at his face, and pulled him into an unexpected hug. "Tell me what happened," Alessandro said, guiding him to a leather couch in the study. Ethan explained about the cancelled contracts, Marcus's call, the systematic destruction of his professional reputation. Alessandro's expression grew progressively darker as he listened. May I ask the name of your ex-fiancé? Alessandro asked quietly. The one who's doing this to you? Ethan hesitated. He'd carefully avoided mentioning Marcus by name, some instinct warning him that connecting these worlds might complicate his friendship with Alessandro. But he was tired of protecting Marcus, tired of letting fear dictate his choices. Marcus Moretti. The silence that followed was deafening. Alessandro's face went through several expressions: shock, anger, disappointment, resignation. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. Marcus Moretti is my son. Now it was Ethan's turn to be shocked. He stood up abruptly, his mind racing to reconcile the kind, thoughtful man he'd befriended with the father of his cruel ex-fiancée. You're Marcus's father. Alessandro Moretti. The Alessandro Moretti. Even as he said it, pieces clicked into place. The Italian heritage, the obvious wealth, the vague references to family business, the way people had deferred to Alessandro at the cafe and concert hall. He'd been so wrapped up in his own pain that he'd missed the obvious signs. I should have told you sooner, Alessandro said, standing but not approaching. When you first told me about your broken engagement, I suspected it might be Marcus. He's been under pressure for me to settle down, to present a stable image. When you confirmed the timeline, I was almost certain. But I wanted to hear more, to understand what my son had done before revealing our connection. So this whole friendship, it was what? Research? Bitterness crept into Ethan's voice. No, Alessandro said firmly. I won't lie to you, Ethan. Initially, yes, I wanted to understand the situation. But within one conversation, I realized something important. My son is a fool who destroyed something valuable out of selfish cowardice. And you're someone worth knowing for your own sake, completely separate from my disappointing son. Ethan sank back onto the couch, overwhelmed. Does Marcus know you've been spending time with me? Not until recently. But yes, he found out. That's likely why he escalated his campaign against you. Alessandro moved to a sideboard and poured 2 glasses of whiskey, handing one to Ethan. I need to be completely honest with you now. About everything. You deserve to know exactly what you've walked into. Over the next hour, Alessandro laid out the truth. The Moretti family wasn't just wealthy, they were one of the most powerful crime families in New York. Their legitimate businesses were real but funded by less legal operations, gambling, protection, strategic consulting for businesses that needed problems solved discreetly. Alessandro had inherited the organization from his father and had spent 20 years trying to transition toward legitimacy while maintaining the loyalty and structure that kept his people safe. I'm telling you this because you need to understand the danger, Alessandro said. Marcus isn't just a spoiled ex using his family name. He has access to real power, real resources. And if he knows about our friendship, he'll see it as a deliberate insult, a betrayal by his own father. Ethan should have been terrified. Every rational part of his brain screamed at him to leave, to cut ties with this family and their dangerous world. But looking at Alessandro, this man who'd shown him patience and kindness, who'd listened without judgment, who'd made him feel valued again, Ethan found he couldn't walk away. I already figured out you weren't just an importer, Ethan said quietly. I'm not stupid, Alessandro. I saw the bodyguards, the way people treat you. I just didn't care because you've been a better friend to me in 3 weeks than Marcus was in 2 years. Something shifted in Alessandro's expression, a carefully maintained wall crumbling slightly. You're not afraid. I'm terrified, Ethan admitted. But not of you. I'm afraid of going back to feeling worthless, of letting Marcus win, of spending my life playing it safe because I'm too scared to trust anyone again. You make me feel seen, Alessandro. Like I matter. I don't want to lose that. The air between them changed, charged with something neither had acknowledged until this moment. Alessandro crossed the space between them, kneeling in front of the couch so they were eye level. I'm going to handle Marcus, Alessandro said, his voice low and intense. He will not destroy your career or threaten you again. But Ethan, you need to understand, if we continue this friendship, if you stay in my life, you'll be stepping into a world with different rules and real dangers. I can protect you, but I can't make that world disappear. What if I said I don't want just friendship? The words came out before Ethan could stop them, but once spoken, he didn't want to take them back. What if I said that somewhere between coffee dates and park walks, I started feeling something more? Alessandro's breath caught. For a long moment, he didn't move, didn't speak. Then, slowly, he reached up and cupped Ethan's face with one hand, his touch gentle despite the strength in those fingers. You deserve someone without the complications I bring, Alessandro said, but his thumb traced Ethan's cheekbone in a caress that contradicted his words. Someone your own age, without blood on their hands and ghosts in their past. Someone who can give you a normal life. I tried normal with Marcus, Ethan said, leaning into Alessandro's touch. It was a lie wrapped in expensive paper. I'd rather have complicated and real than perfect and fake. Alessandro made a sound that was half laugh, half groan. You're going to be the death of me, Ethan Rivera. I'm too old for you. I'm dangerous. I have a son who hates you. I have obligations and enemies and a past that would horrify you if you knew the details. And yet here we are, Ethan whispered, closing the distance between them. Their first kiss was tentative, a question more than a statement. But when Alessandro's hand slid into Ethan's hair and deepened the kiss, it became an answer to questions neither had dared to ask. It was tender and intense, tasting of whiskey and possibility, and when they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. I haven't felt this way since Isabella, Alessandro confessed, his forehead resting against Ethan's. I didn't think I could again. You terrify me in ways that have nothing to do with age or appropriateness and everything to do with the fact that I could lose you. Then don't push me away, Ethan said. Whatever comes, we face it together. They spent the rest of the evening talking about what a relationship between them would mean, the practicalities and dangers. Alessandro was honest about his world, the violence, the moral compromises, the constant vigilance required. Ethan was honest about his fears of being used again, of jumping from one complicated relationship into another even more complex. I want to try, Ethan finally said as midnight approached. I want to see where this goes. But I need your honesty, Alessandro. No more surprises, no more secrets. If we do this, we do it with full transparency. I promise, Alessandro said, sealing it with a kiss. Complete honesty from this moment forward. What neither of them knew yet was that Marcus's betrayal ran deeper than a simple affair, and that the truth, when it emerged, would force Alessandro to make the hardest choice of his life, between his son and the man who'd unexpectedly captured his heart. 3 days later, the situation exploded. Ethan was working late at his studio when Vincent Romano, Alessandro's second-in-command, arrived with 2 other men. Mr. Moretti wants you at the house immediately, Vincent said, his usually friendly face grim. There's been a development. It's about Marcus. The drive to Alessandro's brownstone felt endless. When Ethan arrived, Alessandro was in his study with several other men, all wearing the same tense expressions. Alessandro pulled Ethan aside, his face showing more emotion than Ethan had ever seen. I need you to listen carefully, Alessandro said. Earlier today, I received intelligence that Marcus has been in contact with the Castellano family. They're our rivals, Ethan. Bitter enemies for 3 generations. Marcus has been selling them information about our operations, locations, schedules, financial details. Everything they'd need to destroy us. Ethan felt cold wash through him. Why would he do that? Ambition. Resentment. He's always felt I didn't give him enough power, enough respect. The Castellanos promised him his own territory if he delivered us to them. Alessandro's jaw tightened. But it's worse than that. The information he's selling will get people killed. My people, men with families, children. Good people who've been loyal to me for years. What are you going to do? Ethan asked, though he dreaded the answer. In my world, there's only one response to this level of betrayal, Alessandro said, his voice hollow. Death. It's not just about justice, it's about survival. If I don't respond decisively, every other family will see weakness. We'll be torn apart. Ethan's mind raced. He hated Marcus, despised what his ex-fiancée had done to him. But the thought of Alessandro having to order his own son's execution was horrific. There has to be another way. There isn't, Alessandro said. Not in this world. The council is already demanding action. But Ethan couldn't accept that. He'd spent weeks listening to Alessandro talk about Isabella, about how she'd made him want to be better, to find ways out of the violence when possible. Isabella wouldn't want you to carry this, Ethan said. You told me she always believed in finding the path that let you live with yourself in the morning. Alessandro closed his eyes. Don't use her memory against me. I'm not. I'm reminding you of who you are, not just a boss, but a father. A good man trapped in a bad system. Ethan took Alessandro's hands. There has to be exile, banishment, something that removes Marcus as a threat without making you the man who killed his own son. Please, Alessandro. For yourself, not for him. The silence stretched. Finally, Alessandro turned to Vincent. Gather the council. I have a proposal. The next hours were tense negotiations. Alessandro called in favors, made promises, leveraged his decades of leadership to push through an unprecedented solution. Marcus would be exiled to a remote Moretti property in South America, stripped of all family titles and access to resources. His betrayal would be made public to all the families, destroying any credibility or power he might have sought. The Castellano deal would be exposed, making Marcus a liability to them as well. It wasn't mercy, exactly. It was a living death in many ways, exile from everything Marcus had ever known or wanted. But it was life, and it allowed Alessandro to remain the man Ethan had fallen for. When the decision was finalized, Alessandro found Ethan waiting in the garden. The older man looked exhausted, decades added to his face in a single night. You saved me, Alessandro said quietly. I would have done it. Would have given the order and lived with that horror for the rest of my life. But you gave me another way. I love you, Ethan said, the words simple and true. I don't know when it happened exactly, but I do. And people who love each other don't let each other become monsters if there's any other choice. Alessandro pulled him close, holding him like a lifeline. I love you too. God help me, I love you more than I thought possible. You walked into my life at my lowest moment and reminded me why I tried to build something better. You're my second chance, Ethan. My redemption. They stood in the garden as dawn approached, two men from impossible different worlds who'd found something real in the ruins of betrayal and loss. The path ahead would be complicated, dangerous, and unconventional. But for the first time in years, both felt something they'd thought lost forever, hope. The 6 months following Marcus's exile were a study in contrasts, beautiful and terrible, peaceful and chaotic, filled with joy and shadowed by the constant awareness of the dangerous world Alessandro inhabited. Ethan moved into the brownstone after 2 months, a decision that raised eyebrows among Alessandro's associates but which Alessandro defended with quiet finality. Vincent, initially skeptical, became protective of Ethan after witnessing how the younger man's presence transformed his boss from a grim enforcer into someone who laughed easily and found pleasure in small moments. Marcus and Dylan's exile had been swift and absolute. The remote property in Argentina was comfortable but isolated, with no internet access and only monitored phone lines. Dylan had crumbled within weeks, begging his family to intervene. They'd refused, having been informed by the Moretti family of the couple's role in corporate espionage. Dylan eventually left Marcus, returning to his parents in Boston a broken man who'd learned too late that status and luxury meant nothing without genuine connection. Marcus remained in Argentina, stripped of the privilege that had defined his life. Early reports suggested he was struggling with the actual work required to help run the agricultural property. Alessandro received monthly updates but never spoke of his son except to note with grim satisfaction that Marcus was at least alive, which was more mercy than he deserved. The Moretti organization had been shocked by Alessandro's handling of the situation, but his decisive exposure of Marcus's treachery and the ruthless public disgrace had actually strengthened his position. Other families saw a man who valued integrity over blood, who dealt with betrayal swiftly even when it came from his own son. Paradoxically, the mercy of exile rather than execution was interpreted as the confidence of a leader so secure in his power that he didn't need to prove it through violence. Ethan's career, freed from Marcus's sabotage, began to flourish. Alessandro's connections helped, but Ethan was adamant about earning opportunities based on merit. He started accepting commissions from some of Alessandro's legitimate businesses, creating branding that was sophisticated and effective. A design for an upscale restaurant caught the attention of a lifestyle magazine, leading to features and more high-profile clients. Teresa visited monthly, her initial concerns about Ethan's relationship with a mafia boss gradually giving way to acceptance. "He treats you better than anyone you've ever dated," she admitted during one visit, watching Alessandro and Ethan cook dinner together with easy synchronicity. "He looks at you like you hung the moon." I can't argue with that, even if his tax returns probably terrify the IRS. "We don't talk about the tax returns," Ethan joked, but his sister's approval meant everything. The real test of their relationship came when Ethan met the family, not the biological family, but the chosen family of Alessandro's organization. A dinner at the brownstone brought together Alessandro's most trusted associates and their spouses, a gathering that felt part Sunday dinner and part board meeting. Ethan had been nervous, aware that these people had known Alessandro for decades and might resent the younger man who'd captured his attention. Vincent's wife Maria broke the ice, pulling Ethan aside in the kitchen. "He's different now," she said, arranging desserts on a platter. "Alessandro, I mean. My Vincent says he hasn't seen the boss smile this much since Miss Isabella passed. That's your doing, and we're grateful for it." The evening ended with toasts to new beginnings and found family, with Alessandro's hand warm on Ethan's knee under the table, a private anchor in a room full of people who'd accepted him as one of their own. Not everything was smooth. There were moments when Alessandro's past cast long shadows, a rival family making threats that required increased security, a federal investigation into business practices that had everyone on edge for weeks, the constant awareness that violence was always a possibility in Alessandro's world. Ethan learned to live with bodyguards, to understand when Alessandro's phone calls required him to leave the room, to accept that some aspects of his partner's life would always remain compartmentalized for his own safety. But there were also moments of pure joy. Alessandro teaching Ethan to cook his mother's recipes, flour dusting both their faces as they laughed over a collapsed soufflé. Quiet mornings reading the newspaper together, their feet tangled under the covers. Alessandro attending every one of Ethan's gallery openings, standing in the back with unconcealed pride as critics praised his partner's work. Ethan planning surprise date nights, once a very confused Alessandro in a pottery class, another time a midnight picnic on the brownstone's roof. "You make me feel young," Alessandro said one evening as they watched the sunset from their rooftop sanctuary. "Not in an inappropriate way, but like the world still holds wonder." "I'd forgotten that feeling." "You make me feel valuable," Ethan replied. "Like I'm enough exactly as I am, without needing to change or diminish myself to fit someone else's expectations." 6 months after Marcus's exile, Alessandro took Ethan back to St. Augustine's, the church where they'd first met. Father Giuseppe was lighting candles when they arrived, smiling at the sight of them. "I wondered when you two would return," the priest said. "I've been praying for you both." Alessandro led Ethan to the same pew where they'd first talked, where a broken man and a grieving widower had found unexpected comfort in each other. The evening light streamed through the stained glass, painting everything in jewel tones. "I need to tell you something," Alessandro began, and Ethan's heart clenched with familiar fear. But Alessandro's expression was tender, not troubled. "When I met you here 6 months ago, I thought my life was essentially over. I was going through motions, managing an empire but not living. Isabella's death had hollowed me out, and Marcus's disappointment as a son only reinforced my belief that I'd failed at the things that mattered most. He took Ethan's hands, his thumbs rubbing gentle circles on his palms. Then this beautiful, heartbroken man stumbled into my life and changed everything. You reminded me what it feels like to want to be better, to try harder, to believe in love even when you've been burned. You gave me purpose beyond power, meaning beyond survival. Alessandro shifted off the pew, kneeling in front of Ethan exactly as he had the night they'd first kissed. From his pocket, he pulled out a small velvet box. "I'm not a young man with an uncomplicated life to offer you," Alessandro said, his voice thick with emotion. "I have decades of baggage, dangerous obligations, and a past that would fill several very disturbing books. But I can promise you absolute loyalty, unwavering honesty, and a love that will endure whatever comes. Marry me, Ethan. Let me spend whatever years I have left making sure you never doubt your worth, never question my devotion, never face this complicated world alone." The ring was perfect, a simple platinum band with a blue sapphire, Ethan's favorite color, flanked by 2 small diamonds. Not ostentatious, but clearly expensive, designed with thought for Ethan's taste rather than a desire to show off wealth. Tears streamed down Ethan's face, but he was laughing too. "Yes. Yes, Alessandro. Of course yes." The kiss that followed was witnessed by Father Giuseppe, who cleared his throat after a long moment. "I take it I'll be officiating a wedding soon." "If you're willing," Alessandro said, not looking away from Ethan. "I'd like it to be here, where we began. Small and intimate, just family and close friends." "It would be my honor," the priest said warmly. The next 2 months were a whirlwind of preparation. Alessandro wanted to give Ethan the wedding he deserved, but Ethan insisted on keeping it simple and meaningful. They compromised on an elegant reception at the brownstone following a church ceremony, with about 50 guests, Teresa and her family, Alessandro's inner circle and their loved ones, Father Giuseppe, and a few of Ethan's art world friends who'd remained loyal through the drama with Marcus. Alessandro made one call to Argentina, informing Marcus of the engagement. His son's response was bitter and brief, hanging up after hurling accusations of betrayal. Alessandro looked tired after the call but not regretful. "I tried," he said to Ethan. "He's my son, and I'll always protect him from the worst consequences of his choices. But I won't let his anger poison what we're building." The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, early spring sunshine warming the city. Ethan wore a tailored cream suit that Teresa had helped him select, simple but elegant. Alessandro wore classic black, a white rose boutonniere, and an expression of such open joy that several guests later commented they'd never seen him look so unguarded. Teresa walked Ethan down the short aisle of St. Augustine's, whispering, "Mom would be so happy for you. This is real, little brother. This is the love you always deserved." The ceremony was brief but moving. Father Giuseppe spoke about love being a choice made daily, about the courage required to open your heart after loss, about building something beautiful from broken pieces. Alessandro and Ethan exchanged vows they'd written themselves, words that acknowledged their unconventional beginning and promised to honor each other through whatever challenges lay ahead. "I promise to be your partner, not your savior," Alessandro said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "To respect your strength while offering support. To create a sanctuary of peace and honesty in a world that often values neither. To love you not despite our differences but because of the richness they bring to our lives. I promise to leave the darkness of my world at the door and build something light-filled with you. This I swear on my life and my honor." Ethan's vows were equally heartfelt. "I promise to be your reminder of beauty and hope when the weight of responsibility threatens to crush you. To believe in your goodness even when the world demands you make impossible choices. To build a life with you that honors both who you've been and who you're becoming. To love you not as a replacement for what you've lost but as something entirely new and ours alone." I promise to be brave enough to stay, wise enough to listen, and stubborn enough to fight for us when things get hard. This I swear on my heart and my future." When Father Giuseppe pronounced them married, the church erupted in applause. The kiss was tender and chaste, appropriate for the setting but no less meaningful for it. The reception at the brownstone was elegant without being stuffy. Vincent gave a toast that had everyone laughing about Alessandro's initial grumpiness when Ethan first started visiting frequently, and how quickly that grumpiness had transformed into besotted attention. Teresa's toast was more emotional, thanking Alessandro for giving her brother back his smile and his confidence. Alessandro's toast was simple. "To Ethan, who walked into my life at my darkest moment and became my light. To second chances and new beginnings. To love that transforms." They danced to Ella Fitzgerald, Alessandro leading with surprising grace. "Isabella taught me," he murmured when Ethan commented. "She said a real man should know how to hold his partner properly." "She sounds like she was wonderful," Ethan said. "She was. And I think she'd be happy I found you. She always said life was too short for loneliness, that love was meant to be found and celebrated whenever it appeared." Alessandro pulled Ethan closer. "I used to think loving again would betray her memory. Now I understand that living fully, loving completely, that honors what she taught me." As the evening wore on, guests eventually departed, leaving Alessandro and Ethan alone in their home, now officially shared. They stood on the roof terrace, looking at the city lights. "No regrets?" Alessandro asked, his arm around Ethan's waist. "Not a single one," Ethan replied. "Though I never imagined my life would turn out like this. 6 months ago, I was broken and humiliated. Now I'm married to an incredible man who happens to run a criminal empire. Life is strange." "Strange but good?" Alessandro asked. "Strange but perfect," Ethan corrected, turning to kiss his husband. The year that followed their wedding brought continued changes. Alessandro, inspired by Ethan's passion for art education, established the Isabella Moretti Foundation, funding arts programs in underserved schools throughout the city. It was a way to honor his late wife's memory while creating something positive from the Moretti fortune. Ethan became deeply involved in the foundation, using his design skills and art world connections to make it successful. The foundation had an unexpected side effect. It began Alessandro's slow transition away from the darker aspects of his business. Several of his younger associates, inspired by the boss's changing priorities, started pushing for more legitimate operations. It wasn't a quick transformation, and Alessandro would never be completely clean, but the trajectory was shifting towards something better. Marcus remained in Argentina. After a year, reports suggested he'd finally begun accepting his situation, even developing a grudging competence at managing the agricultural operations. Alessandro maintained financial support and periodic check-ins through intermediaries, but father and son didn't speak directly. It was a wound that might never fully heal, but Alessandro had made peace with it. "I gave him life twice," Alessandro told Ethan. "Once at birth, once by choosing exile over execution. What he does with those gifts is now his responsibility." Dylan had attempted to reach out to Ethan once, a long letter full of apologies and explanations. Ethan read it, felt nothing, and filed it away without responding. Some betrayals were too fundamental to forgive, and he'd learned that closure didn't require reconciliation. On their first anniversary, Alessandro took Ethan back to St. Augustine's for what had become their tradition, lighting candles and spending time in quiet reflection. This time, they lit 3 candles, one for Isabella, one for gratitude, and one for the future. "I've been thinking about legacy," Alessandro said as they sat in their usual pew. "About what I want to leave behind when I'm gone. For years, I thought it would be a powerful organization, respect from other families, wealth for future generations. But now I realize the only legacy that matters is the love we build, the kindness we show, the lives we touch positively." "You're getting philosophical in your old age," Ethan teased gently. "I'm getting wise in my old age," Alessandro corrected with a smile. There's a difference. And that wisdom tells me that marrying you was the best decision I ever made. You didn't just steal my heart, Ethan. You saved it from calcifying into something cold and dead. You reminded me how to be human. They walked home through the spring evening, hand in hand, two men who'd found each other in the wreckage of betrayal and built something beautiful. Their path had been unconventional, complicated by age differences and criminal enterprises, shadowed by family drama and dangerous obligations. But it was theirs, honest, hard-won, and absolutely real. As they reached the brownstone, Alessandro pulled Ethan close. "Thank you for choosing me. For staying when you could have run. For believing I was worth the complications." "Thank you for seeing me," Ethan replied. "For making me feel valuable when I felt worthless. For showing me what real love looks like." They climbed the steps to their home together, the evening light painting everything golden. Behind them lay heartbreak and betrayal, poor choices and painful lessons. Ahead lay uncertainty. The world Alessandro inhabited would always carry risks and moral complexity. But in that moment, standing at their threshold, they had each other, and that was enough. The story of Ethan Rivera and Alessandro Moretti wasn't the fairy tale Ethan had once imagined with Marcus. It was better, messy and real, built on honesty and respect, forged in fire and tempered by genuine love. They'd learned that sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the best beginnings, that age and circumstance matter less than character and connection, and that true love isn't found in perfect circumstances but in imperfect people choosing each other every day. As they closed the door behind them, shutting out the world for another evening of simple domesticity, both men smiled. They'd survived their trials and emerged stronger, wiser, and deeply, irrevocably in love. And that, in the end, was the only story that mattered. Did this story capture your heart? If you loved Ethan and Alessandro's journey from betrayal to true love, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel for more passionate romance stories, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new tale. Share this story with someone who believes in second chances and unexpected love. Comment below with your thoughts, Team Alessandro all the way. Drop a ring if you loved their ending. Thanks for listening, and remember, the best love stories are the ones we never see coming. ****